Welcome back, everyone. Here probably with the first review that anybody's ever done on a model train in a bathroom. But it does have the best lighting of any room in the place, so why not? So what we have here today is an engine I've been after for quite some time. It's the Broadway Limited S2 Pennsylvania Turbine. It is a steam locomotive. It's one of the few steam locomotives that was actually a steam turbine, and we'll go into what the differences of that is in just a moment. These came out about 6 months ago. I guess it was, well, actually probably closer to May of 2016. There are 4 different versions of it. There's a version that has no paint at all. It's just the brass varnish. There's the no smoke deflectors version. This is the small smoke deflectors version, and the one that you see most commonly and seems to be the most sought after one is the high deflector version. But I have the small deflector version here. I would have been happy with either the small deflector or the high deflector. I don't care for the low or no smoke deflector version. I think it looks kind of naked. But we'll take a pause here and then we'll put it on the track and take a look at it. Normally I don't do unboxings, but this model has been out of the box about, well, I've never had it actually out of the box in my possession, but I have saw it run on the track about 2 previous times. So I do know the history of this engine with its previous owner, which is part of the reason that I was interested in it. But underneath the lid here, this is the brass hybrid packaging that you'll find on the Paragon 3 models. I kind of like the packaging that's on the Paragon 2s a little bit more. I think the maroon's kind of a nice look. But in the box, your standard Broadway items, exploded parts diagram, extended warranty if you do it online. Again, just like with the big boy that I took a look at a couple weeks ago, you have these weird little see-through thingies here in the foam. Not really sure what that's for. Maybe just to aid in taking it out. I actually have it upside down here. So underneath the plastic here, you'll find the tender. And of course the locomotive itself. Some of the other things, of course, you get with it. Smoke funnel. And over here in the little parts baggie, it does have optional traction tires, which I believe there's some already installed on this, so you can be assured that this is going to have fantastic pull power. So we'll take a pause here and get it out of the box. I don't usually spend too much time talking about the history of a locomotive, but this one has a rather unique history and also sort of one of a kind, both with railroading in general and also steam locomotives in particular. So this engine was developed in the late 1930s, just prior to World War II, and because of World War II, it did have some effects on the design. So dieselization was coming long before World War II was coming, and the Pennsy was one of those railroads that kind of fought it off to the very last minute. And one of the experiments that they tried was using a steam turbine in place of a traditional steam locomotive setup. The purpose of this would be to achieve greater efficiency. Now, this engine used 2 turbines. The turbines were made by Westinghouse. The engine itself was made by Baldwin. But it was a purely Pennsylvania railroad design. So this engine was delivered in 1944, and it's had a relatively short life, and it did serve until about 1946. It had a various amount of issues when it was running, and we'll go over some of those here in a bit. So taking a look at the locomotive design, it is a little bit different than your traditional steam locomotive. Looking here at the front end, you'll see these small smoke deflectors here. When the engine was first delivered, it did not have those, but due to, I guess, crew concerns, they did place small smoke deflectors on it, and then eventually they did go to a high deflector design also. So this particular kind of middle example here serves as what this locomotive would have looked like around 1945. So about halfway through its service life, this is basically what the configuration that it would have had. So taking a look at the wheel setup here, you'll see on the front trucks here it's actually 6, and then it has 8 driving wheels and then another 6 on the back. So it's a 6-8-6, which it's kind of the only locomotive of its kind to have that wheel arrangement. It was originally supposed to be a 484, but due to wartime restrictions on metals, lightweight metals could not be used, so the locomotive ended up being a lot heavier than actually planned, so they had to modify the front and rear trucks there to accommodate that. So taking a look at some of the other things here on the locomotive, and this thing has a lot of detail to it. You'll notice this kind of sort of odd looking thing here. There's one on each side of the locomotive, and that's actually where the turbine is. So the purpose of that, this is what's known as a direct drive steam locomotive. So you'll see on the running gear that there's no pistons at all. The only purpose of this here is actually for lubrication. So the turbine here that's on this side, and this is the conductor side, actually is for reverse. In reverse, they could achieve 22 miles an hour and I believe 1,500 horsepower. On the other side, there's also a turbine. So there's another one here. That is the primary turbine, and that controls forward operation, and that was good for 6,900 horsepower, which was pretty much unparalleled at anything at the time. And it made that horsepower at about 100 miles an hour, which was around the top speed of this locomotive. It achieved greater efficiency at higher speeds. Below 30 miles an hour, it was actually way more expensive to maintain, and it didn't have the best efficiency. It was very costly. So it was best served for high-speed passenger service. It was not really good as a freighter. And it consumed large amounts of steam at idle and very low speeds. Because of that, it did have some problems with boiler pressure. Normally it would run at 310 psi, but sometimes it could drop as low as 85 psi, and that caused some bolt problems on the boiler and leaks and different mechanical issues as a result of that. Another unique part of its design is the smokestack here, which there's actually 4 of them. So the way these worked is at lower speed, most of them would be closed off and it would only actually shoot out of one of them, and then as speed would open up and speed would increase, then it would actually use all 4 of them. Very similar to kind of the way a Corvette exhaust works now, where it kind of has like a butterfly valve that the lower speeds it's a little more muffled, and then as you get going, then it opens up all of them. And that was to try to maintain a little more pressure. And just taking a look at the tender here, this is very similar in design to a T1 or an S1. No striping though. There's not a whole lot of extra pizzazz on this engine. It's pretty business, but it does have the keystone up front there with the number, which is 6,200. There only was one. If it would have been successful, then maybe there would have been a fleet of these, but this was the only one of its kind. There were plans as late as 1947 or 48 to actually replace the boiler, because the boiler was actually the primary cause of a lot of the problems that this engine had. It used a traditional steam locomotive design for a boiler, which was not practical for the turbine. So potentially if they would have rebuilt it, maybe they could have overcome some of those issues, but with diesel approaching, just wasn't worth it for them. But unfortunately, they never really got another shot at making this good. Unlike some of the engines like the Q1, which initially wasn't very good, but then they modified it and came out with the Q2, which was a tremendous success. I don't know how good it comes out on video there, but the side detail on this locomotive is fantastic. All of this super detailed piping here. Just looking at it on the side of the track, it has a real presence to it. Beautiful. Taking a look at the drawbar here, you'll see that it has actually 3 settings. Most engines usually only have 2, so you can really dial that in depending on what radius you're running this on. Nope, it does not have a smoke hatch here. Just checking to see if it had one of those on there. But pretty much the whole entire engine is all metal, so there's really not any plastic on this at all. And the same goes for the tender. This is pretty much all metal. Has the better looking coal load in it. Some of the Broadway steam engines, at least in the plastic ones, don't always have the best looking coal loads. There's usually one in there, but I think the brass hybrids do it a little bit better. Another detail on this too, and we'll see it once it gets on the track, is that it does have lit rear markers. So that's another touch that I really like there. I don't like it when they have just painted globs of red. I like it when they're actually functional. So now we're on track here, and we're going to start it up. And you can hear that turbine going there. We'll start it up here, and you'll just kind of hear it whir up. And you can see those lit rear markers. And it does not make a chuff, it just kind of makes that whoosh of air. We'll get it cranked up here. See what kind of speed we can get. So, full throttle. Put the speedometer on here. $80. A little slower that time. Nope. Looks like 80 is the best we're going to do there. And you'll also notice here the cab light, which does go off once you start to get moving. Pretty standard Broadway Pensy setup there with the whistle and the bell. Now this thing will smoke like crazy, so we'll go ahead and turn that on for a little bit here, which we do with F7. Kind of hard to see there. But it's smoking pretty good. One thing I do want to point out here is the slow speed control, which will mute the sound. Take a look at the motor here. This is on 1 speed step. You can't do this on a lot of Broadway models because they will kind of jump and hesitate a little bit. This is extremely smooth. Doesn't get any better than that. And we're also going to take a look here at how quiet it is at speed, which is still pretty quiet. That's pretty much going at full speed, and the only real sound is just riding the rails. So extremely quiet. Okay, so there you have it, the Broadway Limited S2 steam turbine Pennsylvania locomotive. Fantastic in pretty much every way. As you take a look over this engine, there's really not a whole lot that you could say would really be better about it. Maybe something that could be added in there would be maybe some little automation bits in there, or maybe actual lit markers up front instead of just joules. I mean, this engine does pretty much everything well. It is priced a little bit high, but there's also some exclusivity with it. I mean, this is the only time that this engine's ever been done outside of your imported brass, you know, things like Challenger imports and Sam Hogusa and a bunch of others that are out there. West Side Brass, I think, also did this engine, but all of those versions are well into the thousands of dollars, and to be honest, most of them really aren't any better than this. In a lot of cases, they're not even painted. And even if they were, they're usually not going to include the sound that this has. So one of the things that impressed me the most about this engine is this is an engine that hasn't existed for well over 50 years. So this whole entire thing was created all from blueprints and pictures, because there is no prototype that they can actually go out and take a look at and get measurements on and all those other things. I mean, there's only drawings and pictures pretty much at this point of this locomotive. It hasn't existed in a very, very long time. So for them to do this much out of so little information to go on is pretty impressive. Also, the other thing that's really impressive is the sound file. There really were no other examples of this engine, so it's very hard to actually get a realistic sound that may have actually sounded like the prototype. There's probably not too many also persons that are still with us and living that actually observed this engine running in person to compare it to. So from what I understand, some of the locomotive sounds that were recorded or generated were based off of some European designs that had direct drive steam locomotives also. So I'm sure that was a challenge, and very, very happy with how Broadway did that. Maybe would have liked to have saw a little bit better whistle on it. It's just kind of a generic Pensy whistle that they have on all their stuff. It's okay. It's not the best. It's not the worst. But, you know, not a huge deal. I mean, the detail on this engine is outstanding. I mean, there's really nothing you can look at on this engine and say, you know, that's bad or this is inaccurate. Fantastic example of this, and by far for the money, definitely the best version of this engine you can possibly buy. If it's something that you want, I would suggest trying to pick one up very shortly, because they are still in some stores right now, and usually with a model like this, once they're gone in stores, then really your only way of finding one's going to be in a classified or, you know, someone on eBay that's selling it at an outrageous price that's way, way more than what they actually were new. This is an engine that's kind of for the Pensy diehard fans out there. It's not really for someone who just kind of casually collects steam locomotives. I mean, it's really for the Pennsylvania Railroad fans, which is nice that Broadway's kind of always filled that need, because they've put out probably at least a dozen engines that have never been done outside of brass, and brought them down to a reasonable level in price and availability for the diehard Pensy collectors out there. And this is one that was missing from the marketplace for a really, really long time. It's my sincere hope that they do the Pennsylvania S1 at some point. So I hope if there's anybody out there from Broadway watching, please do the S1. That's another one that's never been done outside of brass, and it's something that's desperately needed. I don't know how functional it would be as a locomotive because it's extremely long, but that's a whole nother story. But final thoughts on this one. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd have to say it's a 10. I mean, you can't really ask for a whole lot more out of this engine. It's perfect. They did everything well. Outstanding motor. It has traction tires. We didn't really talk too much about the pulling power, but with traction tires and the weight of this locomotive, because it does have some decent weight to it, I don't think you'll have any problems running a fairly long passenger consist on this and doing it at a pretty high speed. It should perform excellent for you. The smoke is pretty outstanding on this. I mean, it does have a pretty good unit in there. Puts out a really, really good amount of smoke. Not quite as much as the big boy that we talked about previously, but a pretty good amount. I'm not a real big smoke fan. That's generally something that I leave turned off, but it is nice to have that on every now and then if you're taking the engine out to show off or run it for family and friends. It's kind of nice to have that feature on there. So I like that that's in there if I want to use it. And it's also nice that you can turn it off if you don't want to use it. So I have nothing but love for this engine. It's one that I've wanted pretty much since it was announced, and I was lucky enough to finally be able to get one. So that's pretty much it for this one. Really, really love the model. Have nothing but positive things to say about it.